Hi, I'm Michael. Welcome to Beyond the Screenplay, the podcast where each episode we do a conversational analysis into a film. Today, for week 4 of our sequel summer, we are talking about Twister, the 1996 film written by Michael Crichton and Anne-Marie Martin, directed by Jan de Bont. I am joined by the Beyond the Screenplay team, Trisha Rand.
Hello, everyone.
Brian Bittner.
Hello.
And Alex Calleros.
Hi.
Okay, so last week, for week 3 of our sequel summer, we talked about A Quiet Place, Day 1, technically a prequel. That was a fun conversation. Next week, as a Patreon exclusive, we were talking about the new film, Twisters, plural, with our buddy Glenn Powell. I'm really excited to go and see that. It's going to be a lot of fun. And so in preparation for that, we were talking about Twister, the original from 1996 today. And I'm very excited to be talking about this movie. This movie is corny and cheesy and absolutely absurd and amazing. I really, really enjoyed this movie. I rewatched it last year just to see if it held up. And I don't know that I can properly evaluate if it holds up because I just have nostalgia feelings watching it. But it was really fun to watch it then. It was fun to watch it this week in preparation for this show. And there are some ridiculous things in this movie. But structurally, I feel like there's some really solid screenwriting happening. And genre-wise, I think this is a really interesting movie. It's a disaster movie, but it also is kind of a horror movie, right? There's like action, obviously, in here, but there's also some horror elements, like the tornado literally killed her father and
murderer.
And
kidnapped her mother.
There's like a sequence where they're at a drive-through and The Shining is playing on. That's the movie that's being projected, and so I feel like there was some awareness about treating the tornado like a monster, like a horror antagonist. It growls sometimes.
Yeah, the sound design. Like I watched it surround, and it was just like, oh man, this thing is growling all around my head, and it's kind of awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about that, and then just also like it was fun to remember back to 1996. I remember seeing this in a theater, and it just feeling epic and overwhelming, and the visual effects were mind-blowing, like this kind of thing we had never really seen before. This was just as like CGI was starting to be able to do things like this, and so I have those feelings that are wrapped up in my memory of what it was like in that moment, but also some things that I think are still really valid structural screenwriting lessons that we can extract if you are sitting down to write a cheesy summer blockbuster disaster movie. I think
they are. There's one coming out.
There's one coming out. Yeah.
Hopefully they've written it.
Hopefully. We'll see. Anyway, so that's me. Trisha, tell me about Twister.
I'm so glad you called on me next. Twister, or as I like to call it, the first DVD.
Mm-hmm.
This was, in fact, the first film released on DVD, the first feature film released on DVD.
Really? Not just the first one you owned, the first one ever on DVD.
Nope. It is the first one ever. So, watermark in a variety of ways. No, this was a really formative movie for me. I absolutely love it to death. It is so entertaining and exciting. The pacing of it, I do want to talk about. I think you're absolutely right about the screenwriting lessons that are here, Michael. The special effects, the thrills, the way the sequences are constructed, I think is really fascinating. It was, honestly, like right at this like threshold, as you're talking about, of CGI, but also practical on location in camera effects are everywhere in this movie. And I think you can't talk about it without talking about how jaw dropping that was at the time. Like it's it was, and I still think is in places, incredibly impressive looking. I think the performances are amazing. The cast is so stacked. And we can get into that. Like, I just love this movie. I have so many memories. I've watched it so many times. But especially when I was a teenager, I just watched it constantly. I have so many memories of being in my friend's basement, really my crush's basement, with like a big group of people and just like watching Twister many times over and eating junk food and just being so into it. So this movie has a very special place in my heart, but also holds up, in the words of Helen Hunt, who watched it again recently for the first time in quite a while. So yeah, it holds up, I think.
Nice. Okay.
For another take.
Brian, no, not yet. Alex, what are your thoughts?
So I was saying off mic before we started to Trisha that this might be my mummy of the group. Where
no.
I saw it maybe like once, twice back in the day. I didn't see it in theaters, I'm pretty sure. And I'm sure I saw it like on DVD or rental, whatever, at some point. But I actually have more memories of all the other Storm Chaser content that came out around this time. Like there was like an IMAX, movie about Storm Chasers, and that I remember very clearly seeing. I remember there were like TV shows about Storm Chasers, right? I think the Storm Chaser phenomenon, I absorbed a lot of that content. But actually, the movie Twister, where I think it all came from, I only saw, maybe once or twice. And so I don't have that deep nostalgia for it. And so it was very interesting to watch it without that. And I understand where Brian was coming from a bit with The Mummy, where I can see how, this would be delightful to revisit if I had seen this a million times as a child. As an adult, like the whole gang of all these goofy, eccentric, over-the-top people, like Philip Seymour Hoffman is just like so that dude, like weird Gen X boomer thing, whatever that is. Like these archetypes are so extreme and so like in your face. It's a very 90s thing, but there are other 90s movies that have these archetypes, and I think that Twister just felt like it was the evil scientist,
Cary Elwes.
What even is he like? So it was hard for me to like feel grounded in this world, because like I don't understand what this world even is and like what the tone actually is, because some very like realistic, well done sequences with real stakes and her aunt and like that whole thing, that felt like, this is like aiming for real emotion and aiming for real stakes. And other sequences are just like what what is this world, or what is this like villain? And so it was an interesting experience, but I definitely appreciated, especially sound design wise, how hard this movie goes. And you're right, there's kind of a horror element in how hard it goes with the sound design, with the intensity of the sequences. I'm curious to absorb from all of you guys and learn more about your experience with this movie, but I was kind of like, okay, I'm excited to see Twisters and see how this has evolved, or what is the next iteration of this. But by the end of it, I was kind of like, thinking about Twisters, I was like, what else can you do with like releasing little robots into a tornado or running away from a tornado? Like, is it that? How much can you do with this premise, really? Because I was like getting a little bit tired of it by the end. Like tornadoes can only do so many different kinds of things. Anyway, so I'm not sold on the Twister franchise at this moment. Maybe you guys can sell me.
Oh, we will, Alex.
Yes.
Don't worry.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah.
All right. Brian, what about you?
Yep. Like Alex, I saw this in the theater and then definitely saw reruns on TBS or whatever, but I have not seen it in a long, long time. So I do not have any nostalgia for it or anything. And I can put up with quite a bit of cheesy music and dated kind of feeling things, and a lot of the things Alex was talking about, if the movie is good, and this movie is awesome, so I loved all of that. I had no problem with any of it. The pacing is so good. Like, even when they stop at Aunt Meg's house and they're just like having dinner, it's like still everything is moving and the characters are still talking. Someone comes in and something's happening. I was like, this is supposed to be the like chill part of the movie, and it's still just constantly moving. The character stuff is so great, which we'll get into, and this movie cares about its characters, which like movies forget to do sometimes, especially this kind of movie. Helen Hunt is like so badass in this movie, and I really like did not remember it because I'm just like, oh yeah, the Mad About You person, right? Like, I don't remember that she was like could play this almost like not quite a Ripley kind of character, but almost in that vein,
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I definitely have a couple things where I'm like, that kind of, bumped for me a little bit. But all in all, I had just had a blast rewatching it and very excited to talk about it with you guys.
Nice.
We got it.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You mentioned that kind of relentlessness, even in the down moment, there's just, there's like 20 people talking at each other in this like Aaron Sorkin style. And I think both cool, like maybe impressive, and that you never let us have a break. But I think maybe it's also a personal allergy to the type of nonstop bantery, like goofball group of misfit people, whatever this is. Like, yeah, it's the kind of nonstop barrage of like banter that I find exhausting rather than like compelling. And so maybe we can talk about that too, of just like what is this thing? I know Joss Whedon had like a crack at the script, and a lot of people touch the script and their kind of brands maybe kind of work their way in there. And I feel a little bit of that like Joss Whedon thing where it's like I never got into the Marvel banter, and there's something about this collection of characters always talking, always goofing, always yelling that I find it kind of exhausting. But I think other people, maybe especially at the time as kids, find delightful and amazing and energetic. So maybe that's part of my curmudgeonliness is reacting to that, whatever that is.
But also the movie that's this with Bill Paxton from 10 years earlier, Aliens, you love. Which is even more aggressively in your face. And Bill Paxton is playing the Philip Seymour Hoffman role. And yeah.
And I saw it a million times when I was younger. So
there you go.
There's a big difference. Yeah.
Well, and if we can just like maybe dive right into this topic because it's here on the table. I think that, one thing about a movie about scientists essentially is that there's this expectation of like serious-minded people who are there to do serious work. But one thing that scientists are known for in real life is passion for the thing that they are pursuing, right? Like if you are pursuing a field of science that's going to take you into dangerous places, unexpected places, there must be like a very high level of passion. And, I like that these characters are allowed to be incredibly uncool because they are so passionate, right? Like they are so unself-conscious about the way that they're coming across, right? Like a very serious woman, psychiatrist, stranger to them, is like brought into their midst in like the second scene of this movie, and they're all immediately just like, hey, welcome, we're doing this thing, like come over here, look how cool this is, like let me explain it to you. And I think all of that really works. Again, we've talked about the pacing, but it catches you up in that excitement right away. And I think that like, yeah, it can be kind of exhausting, but it reminds us constantly, like having these, half a dozen characters that are always on the ride with Joe and Bill. It reminds us constantly of like why they're doing it, that there's this excitement, there's this investment. And it's this childlike wonder, right? About nature and what it's capable of. And I think it's really catching for a lot of people who watch this movie. Maybe not for you, Alex, but definitely for me when I watched it.
Well, and I think it's doing story world building also,
Absolutely.
Right? These are people that chase tornadoes. They're not normal people. They're extreme personalities. And, the Dr. Melissa Reeves character is an interesting kind of efficient use of like, she's a newcomer to this world. So she's kind of an audience surrogate. And so that, the contrast between her kind of normal expectations and everybody else's insanity is like a big part of like the narrative. And it also affords us a chance to learn about what they're doing, and they can explain, oh, here's this thing and that thing. So I feel like that's an interesting, smart use of that character, because she's also plays a role in the love triangle, obviously. But I also think it's like maybe not entirely accurate to say that it like the movie is constantly like this. Like there are, when it's going, it is a lot. And especially that first scene where you're meeting everybody, I kind of love it, but it is, you're going over here, there's this person, there's that person, but they're also kind of efficiently establishing like, the different people's kind of quirks and their, whatever their little thing is, they like set it up and move on. But then there also are these moments where it's, Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt in the car, and it kind of gets quiet for a moment, and they're like having character moments. And so I feel like the ebb and flow of the movie, I think, I don't know, is really well balanced between overwhelming character stuff, overwhelming twister moments, and then smaller character moments where, kind of like you were saying, Brian, the movie cares about its characters and cares about this love story that's a little goofy, but is like compelling, I think, because the performance is largely. Anyway, so I feel like it's balancing these things, and that it's, to me, doesn't feel like they're constantly bantering or talking over each other. Because even as a kid, I didn't really like the other people. Like, I think Philip Seymour Hoffman's character freaked me out a little bit. So I think this person is too much. I don't ever want to meet this person.
There's a straw in his car. Like,
but retroactively, I just love that it's Philip Seymour Hoffman, and that you just get the sense they were just like, yes, go, like be.
How many movies did he play this character? Like some version of the what is oh god, what's his name? The character name in Mr. Ripley.
Oh yeah.
Fred,
not Dickie.
Yeah, Freddie.
Freddie. Yeah. But yeah,
I read somewhere that Jan de Bont said that he was undirectable. He's like, I tried to tone him down. I tried to get him to change it. I was not successful. This is what we have.
That's great.
That's great. Well, and again, like you were saying, Trisha, like that supporting cast is stacked with, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Alan Ruck, like all these people, Jeremy Davies.
The director of Tar, weirdly, is in this movie.
Yeah.
Yep.
Lois
Patrick
Smith, I love her in anything.
Oh, yeah, she's amazing.
So, just like the supporting cast is kind of insane also, and I feel like that elevates it and makes these people feel like slightly more three-dimensional, I think, than a total flat, cardboard cutout version of one of these people could feel, to me anyway.
I was paying close attention this time to the POV of the movie, because it is, interestingly, I think it's a true two-hander, where I think, honestly, both Joe and Bill have arcs, and that's kind of standard, or can be, for like a romantic drama. It's a little harder to pull off in an action movie, but I think this does it very well. Because the movie opens with us in Joe's POV, right? Where there's the flashback to the twister that ate her dad and that like traumatic experience in her childhood. And then essentially it brings us to the present into Bill's POV, right? Like he is coming back to the situation. We see him in the car with his new fiance, and he's like, okay, here we go. Like, we're going to get her to sign the papers. It's going to be this thing. And we're kind of left in the dark about what Joe is thinking, or like what she feels about him, the divorce. Like, so when they roll up and she has this sort of breezy nature of like, oh, hey, Bill, how's it going? And like, oh, we're chasing this thing and blah, blah, blah. And, she's like, oh, I've got the papers right here. And we're sort of forced to interpret her behavior the way that he is. Like, we don't really know what she is feeling or what she wants. Like, it hasn't been made clear to us. Now, it's interesting that pretty quickly, like, we see her take that one ring off and put it on her other finger as though she is engaged or something. She like moves a ring from one finger to another. So we start to see some of her actions that Bill doesn't necessarily see. So the movie is kind of juggling the POV. But also, it doesn't tell us right away she didn't sign the papers on purpose. She's like, "Oh, did I miss a spot? Did I?" You kind of don't know. Like you're just trying to read her actions as best as you can without being let into the interior of that character. And then I was paying also attention to how the movie then traps them together, or like how Bill gets roped into this whole adventure. And it's really like artfully done. It like the pacing of it just sweeps them up, but in a way that is believable, I think, for the situation. I'm like, when I was watching it this time, I was like, okay, he's really just here to get the divorce papers signed or like pick them up essentially, because apparently they, as far as he knows, they already are signed. But then like she's got Dorothy already. Like, again, it doesn't feel like she's trying to trap him there. She's genuinely excited to show it to him. But okay, then there's a twister coming. We have to jump in the cars, like, and then we meet the villain and he stole my design. And then like, again, it's all sort of cleverly done. And we're being put kind of in Bill's POV about like, well, I just have to go on this next one. Well, I just have to go on this next one. And then like, you can go back to the hotel. Like, I'll meet you later. Like, again, how it sweeps him up and is kind of with them both, but really, I don't know, it pulls it off very neatly, those kinds of plot devices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will say, for all my gripes about like 90s side characters, I really did like that whole setup. Like that scene you're describing, Trisha, I was really into it, because you're right, there is that perspective where we're with Bill's perspective. We are trying to read her signs. What is she getting at? And it becomes pretty clear to me when she is like somehow forgot to sign something or lost a paper. But I really like their story. I like that excuse for him not being able to leave, having to stick around because they have to get those papers. It's a really simple MacGuffin premise, but it works really well. And I did enjoy that as a through line through the whole movie of, will they, won't they, what's going on with his new fiance. So it's a really smart, if you're going to have this kind of romantic drama at the center, very smart way to like set it up and play it up.
Yeah.
And to add to that, I really like the design of Melissa, the fiance, because I feel like it would have been so easy for her to be, Willie Scott from Temple of Doom, right? Just like, oh, I broke a nail. What are you guys doing? But she's like genuinely interested, and she's like, oh, I've never seen this side of you and stuff. But then she also, it's not really her thing. And, so it's like, it's hard to walk that line where we as the audience, we don't hate her, but we're also like not rooting for their relationship, right? So it's like she can kind of be an antagonistic character, and as you were saying, Michael, the audience surrogate character, and a character where like when she has her scene where she's like, I'm not that upset. Like, why is that? You're not being like, good, she's out of here. You're like, man, this scene is awesome. And like, I love you. Right. I hope you're okay. I want these two other characters to be together, but I really like you. And I want you to be happy too. Right. And you could have also gone the other end where it's like, ooh, which one's he going to choose or whatever. But that's also not what this movie is. So I really like that they had like it's like a delicate situation with that character that could have gone totally off the rails, and I feel like they handled it just right.
Right. And to counter some of my arguments against this movie, that feels very real. The way the breakup happens feels very real and honest. To a lot of breakups happen where it's kind of like, actually, you know what? We both aren't really feeling that sad about this. That's kind of interesting. Okay. And that's real. It's not a movie thing. That's more of a real life thing. And I appreciate the story having, like what you guys are saying, having real characters that the movie really cares about, and not just doing like generic tropes for those moments.
Also, a quick side note to that is I like the music in this movie in a lot of places, but the moment where Joe and Bill are having their big moment, like, oh, it's me and what's it got to move on, da da da. The music is like kind of terrible in that moment, and it's like really, it's like one of the few times in a movie where I'm like, I feel like this moment is cheesier because of the music. Like the music is telling me to feel that way, even though it's not necessarily the writing and the performances. But in the Melissa breakup scene, there is no music, and it is just played like more like a drama, and it was unfortunate that like I didn't love, like, one of my biggest bumps in the movie was like the big dramatic scene between the two characters, but then it also made me really appreciate the breakup scene.
I was reading a recent interview with Helen Hunt and Jan de Bont, who are looking back now at Twister, which is really fascinating. I think it's, an Entertainment Weekly. And Helen Hunt was saying, like, she thinks that character, the Melissa character, is kind of like the secret sauce of the movie, where you don't immediately identify her as being like fun because she's no one's like favorite part of the movie. But she is such a smart narrative device for all these reasons that we're identifying, not just as an audience surrogate character, but also as like a formidable person in this love triangle that makes it a little bit more difficult for Bill to like make a decision. Because she is, sympathetic in a variety of ways and understanding, she comes just from a totally different world, but she's also a very intelligent person as far as we can tell. And the movie is unkind to her in places. I do want to say that. There are certainly moments where she's like, I got you a lemonade, sweetie. And like, they drive away with the lemonade on top of the car. Like there are those moments where it's just played for laughs. But I really love the moment in the diner where she has a face-off with Helen Hunt's character. And she's like, you're still in love with him, aren't you? And that easily could just become like, girl fight, women at each other's throats, fight over the man. And it doesn't go that way, right? Like Joe gives her this look of kind of understanding, sympathy, also just like, I'm not going to answer that. Like I'm not having this conversation with you right now. It's weird. It's weird for the movie because as a scene, it doesn't like force to a crisis for either of the characters, but it does like reveal a truth to us, the audience. And it's really effectively done. And I also like the dynamic between the two of them because they don't wish each other ill, right? And that's the easy way for this to go, is to just turn into a fight. I think in that same interview, Helen Hunt was saying that in the original script, they were supposed to be more catty at each other. And she and that actress both immediately were like, no, we're not going to play it that way. We're not going to do it that way. And I just really respect how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I feel like this movie, kind of like we were just saying a minute ago, is so good at forcing characters into the situations that they're in. So it doesn't require dumb motivations for characters. We don't need a moment where like Helen Hunt is like, ooh, I'm going to scheme and force drama or force you to come into, Bill along for the ride, or whatever the other variations of it. There's no moment where I feel like a character is doing something dumb to motivate the plot. And so instead, you can just like empathize and understand each of the characters, why they're behaving, why they're getting sucked into this ride, and how all the dominoes are falling. And I feel like it lets you relate to all those people. There's a bad guy in this movie, and and like, so I feel like he serves the plot, right? Dr. Jonas Miller. And like, on one hand, it's just so over the top, but also like he's very clearly rendered as the bad guy, right? There's no mistaking. He's got a fleet of black cars, and he has lots of like tech, and he's wearing his tech.
He's in it for the money, not the science.
He's in it for the money, not the science, is a line from this movie. Dorothy has spheres. He has cubes, like, the different technology. But I kind of like that, at least if they were going to go for it, they really went for it and like rendered it very clearly like this is our antagonist. And it's nice that, our heroes treat him generally as like a human, right? There's the sequence where he dies. It's just insane. But they're like trying to save his life and save the life of the driver. And so while it's a little weird how quickly Bill's like, I'm going to start a fight with him at this press conference. And like, you saw my idea to like punching guys. I do like that ultimately they still see him as a colleague and are trying to like save his life and their lives. So I like that. I mean, you would have to be sadistic to not do that, but I like that how much they still they gave our heroes that moment to be heroic and be selfless and want to save this cartoon character of a bad guy that they have a long history with, apparently.
Yeah.
Right. We mentioned The Mummy earlier, and speaking of that, there is, there is the thing in both these movies where it's like there are two teams going after the same thing, right? And obviously that's just like instant conflict, instant urgency that gets fed into it. It does feel a little, twirling his mustache-y kind of thing at times, for sure. But I do like that it's like this movie has has pressure from all directions, between the love triangle and then the urgency of Dorothy, and obviously the timing of trying to get to a twist in time. And then you have another team who's trying to get there. And just like, it's like there's always something, even when one thing is resolved, the other two things haven't been resolved, and there's always something kind of pushing. And I really appreciate that that's what you get from the Jonas character. And then I also like the irony of Bill Paxton saying he's a nightcrawler, because
It's interesting. This movie does what I think a lot of 90s movies that have these kind of like cool scientists in them do, which is there's the like by the book people, or the tech people. They're relying on machines to do the thinking for them people. And then there's like the down to earth, like gut level scientists.
I will
like,
pick up sand and drop it, and I know which way the
exactly.
will
It's
go.
like no radar needed, no tools needed. I'm like I'm like a live off the land scientist. And that's a very interesting trope that I've noticed in quite a few movies, but this one it's like crystal clear. Yeah, black van, high tech. They don't know what they're talking about. And then the people who can listen to the wind or see some rain go this direction and be like, that tornado's coming right at you. I don't care what your computer says.
Yeah, I like that Bill is just a tornado whisperer, and they like just say that like basically in dialogue. They're like, he is the storm. Like he just knows. Like, it's wild. But just a friendly reminder that this is right on the heels of Jurassic Park.
Yeah. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler.
They really are like huge, like blockbuster that reshaped all blockbusters. It's essentially a monster movie, which this kind of is, as we've talked about. And
written by Michael Crichton also, which is
insane. That's what I was going to say. There's a lot of crossover here.
Yeah.
Divorce.
We've got, it's all in the mix.
No kids.
And I think that's, and again, the themes of technology, right? Like, is technology our savior or our doom? And is it possibly both? Can there be science done? They are pursuing a scientific discovery using scientific tools, but then also there's a level of like instinct and connection to nature and respect for nature that maybe we should have.
Right.
So again, this is very much in like, I can't overstate, if you weren't there in the 90s, listener, I can't overstate what was happening with the Jurassic Park phenomenon. And Alex, you mentioned the like Storm Chasers, like spin-off documentaries and like exhibits. Like every science museum had a tornado exhibit in 1996 or 1997 following this movie. And so it's all just, and previous to that, they all had a dinosaurs thing like experience, and it's kind of combining some of the successful elements and learning some of the lessons from that movie in terms of like theme and the wonder of nature, and also nature's destructive forces and all of that.
Yeah, this was also the decade of, but partially because this is what people wanted from blockbusters, and partially because we could start doing this with effects now, was the decade of the disaster movie, right? With Backdraft, Outbreak, and Twister, Titanic, Dante's Peak, Armageddon, Deep Impact. It was just like one after another, some better than others. But it was very much that era of that. It's interesting to follow that that genre.
Well, and though, going back to the Cary Elwes character, I think when you have a disaster movie or a monster movie, then your central antagonist is like an essentially like unreasonable supernatural almost force, right? Or natural force in this case. And so to create complications in the second act, especially if you've done as good a job of containing the plot as this does, which the containment here is awesome. Like it's just like 5 cars and roads and cornfields and
like
in a
24
matter
hours.
of 24 hours.
Yeah.
Yes, A+ on containment. But like if you've done that work and then you have the central antagonist being this natural force or like overwhelming force, then to create complications, you do have to introduce several antagonists in the second act. And so I do think it's smart for that reason. You'd be surprised at how often when I'm writing screenplay coverage, I say, you need another antagonist. And it doesn't have to be a villain with a capital V. It just needs to be somebody or something that, some other kind of adverse force that is pushing and pulling your characters.
Yeah.
I wonder if there was some way to have made the villain in this movie, I guess, feel less generic if it wasn't just, I have exactly the same devices you have, trying to achieve actually the same goal, which is theoretically like for science, like for the world, for humanity. Like if he discovers how to save human lives, is that really that awful?
Right.
So I almost wish there was a way that they could have made him a rival scientist more directly at odds with her humanitarian goals, or he wants to do something that will render her data unusable or whatever. And then the pressure may have felt a little bit less kind of, to me, it was like, I'm not that worried if they get to it first and release their sensors. That's still kind of a win. It didn't feel like the end of the world. It's just kind of like an ego hit for the other rival scientists, but not a loss for science. Whereas, in Jurassic Park or, Dennis Nedry stealing the embryo or like getting off the island, that has stakes. It's like you're spreading the dinosaur outbreak off this island potentially or to a rival company. That just felt different to me than like, we're both going to get good data. Just one of us first.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, like the world of this movie is just kind of fascinating. And it went over my head as a kid. I just accepted that like, this is surely exactly how tornadoes work and surely exactly how, I'm sure someone's out there trying to release balls into the tornado and then we're going to solve twisters. Like, it's such a bizarre world where also like the worst thing you can be called is like a weatherman. Like everyone sort of like whispers that of like, oh yeah, I heard. Oh, I saw your news report. You son of a bitch! Like it's so. The story world of this movie is insane, but which also kind of feels like a '90s thing in a way of like just going to create this kind of bizarre story world and then go really hard toward it, even though it doesn't make a whole lot of logical sense. I want to talk about Aunt Meg, because I think she's an amazing character, wonderful performance, but also just a really efficient use of a supporting character, right? So they all swing by Aunt Meg's house, so we get a chance to meet this character. It's a nice home. She's feeding everybody. We see the familial relation. She's sort of like, it seems like a surrogate mother almost to Joe. She's giving sage advice about like, here's like, he's here and blah, blah, blah. Like, so we get this really nice experience with her. We set up her sort of decorations or sculptures or whatever she's doing. And so we just know a lot about this character pretty quickly. And I feel like, care about her, as one would. And then it's almost kind of surprising when she comes back into it. Like, I feel like the movie didn't need to go back to her in terms of, watching it as an audience member. I sort of forget Aunt Meg for a little bit until the reveal of like, oh no, this big twister, it hit Wakita. And now they got to go with that word is burned into my head also. Like,
I know.
Wakita?
Wakita temporary. But so they go there, and so that also ups the stakes, right? As we're in this, the second half of Act 2, so this has gotten personal again, right? The tornadoes have attacked Aunt Meg. It affords us.
They took her dad. They almost took Aunt Meg.
Right.
Yeah. The dog.
The dog, right? She has a dog, of course. It affords an action sequence of like, we got to go into this teetering house and rescue Aunt Meg.
Also very Jurassic Park, like car in the tree vibes.
Yes. And then also is the kind of epiphany moment for Jo when she sees the spinny sculptures and she's like, oh, that's what we didn't think of. I gotta get tin cans. Grab every tin can. Get me
Pepsi
some
only.
Yeah,
as much Pepsi as you can find.
Yes, brand allegiance is critical for the science. But it's just like it's a very efficient character. It does emotional things. It does plot things. It does character work. And so just one of the things I didn't appreciate, obviously, as a kid, but watching it now, I'm like, this is really smart screenwriting to use this character so fully. I guess it's almost like, as the new fiance character kind of fades out, we kind of fade in with Aunt Meg. And so the use of both of these supporting characters is just really smart in this movie. And I think the energy was put into making them be as effective as possible in a way where they could easily have done it in a lazy way that would not have been as effective.
Mm.
As you're pointing out, it's very on the nose. I think she literally says, we had no warning. But it reminds you of like, what is the point of this data? Why does Jo care so much about this at all? It's because of this. It's because of her dad. It's because of people getting hurt or killed because of the lack of data. And so it's a really good way to send us into the third act because we may have forgotten that by this point, honestly.
Reminds us of the stakes. Yeah.
I think it's interesting, too, that crisis point, because that is where the sequence falls structurally. I think it's really interesting that is the same tornado, essentially, or same storm that hits them at the drive-in. And like they're at that motel in the drive-in. And, that sequence is really harrowing because it's the first time that the team has had like a really close brush with the tornado, right? Up until that point, it's basically just Jo and Bill. Like the team's kind of like tagging along behind, but they're like somehow always Jo and Bill are like, we've cut across this field and we're on a different road than everybody, or we're so much further ahead of everybody, or whatever it is. And so the team hasn't really had a close brush up until that scene in the drive-in. And, someone gets hurt. Like one of the members of the team gets hurt during that sequence, where they're in that Quonset hut, which I guess is a garage. And they're like, down in the pit, basically.
And the Twisters throwing cars at them one by one.
Right. That sequence is really interesting. Up until that point, the encounters that we've had with the Twister have been basically just Jo and Bill in a field somewhere, right? Like there's been some farm equipment, there's been some other things, but like this is crowded area, like people at a drive-in, cars everywhere, structures everywhere, and we're kind of seeing firsthand the danger that Twisters pose to people. It's not abstracted scientific over there something. It's right here. It's these particular people, and this town, this very real cluster of buildings and the people who live here. And then again, a member of the team gets hurt, and then from there, that tornado goes straight to Aunt Meg's house, basically, as far as we know, because they pull up the map and they're like, it's heading for Wakita. So it really, manages to land a lot of the stakes and really starts to feel, I don't know, like, not that Jo and Bill's brushes with the tornado haven't been harrowing or dangerous. They are. But again, what are the stakes? Why do we care about this? And it's because tornadoes are harmful to everyone. They might not only hurt our protagonists, they might hurt innocent bystanders as well. And in fact, that's primarily who they hurt. And so this is why we have to keep pursuing what we're doing.
Yeah. Structurally, I mean, I have complicated feelings about, Save the Cat and the Blake Snyder beat sheet, but it's the bad guys close in beat, essentially, where it's like the first half is our heroes attacking the Twisters, essentially. And this is the Twisters like striking back almost, where it's like, you're going to put pressure on us. There's going to be consequences. We're going to come after you. And so it's like emotionally doing that beat. And in a way that, like, I guess you don't have to, it makes sense. I don't know how much you need to motivate a Twister Twister's actions in a movie like this. But
whatever you want.
Right, I guess it's whatever you want. But so if you can make them do whatever you want, make them follow good narrative structure, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Well, I think the important thing is that the movie is not trying to say that it's motivated, right? It's not Jaws the Revenge, like where it's like this time it's personal, you know. It's doing the things that the bad guy would do in a movie, but just at random. Like it just happens to be at random. It just works structurally for the movie, as you're pointing out, to have it happen in that order.
Talking about the way the movie treats tornadoes, I do also appreciate that in that, I think it's the midpoint essentially where they fail to release Dorothy. There's the kind of unpredictability and the frustration of trying to work with nature, in which you just can't ever get it right because it's just totally chaotic. It's chaos theory. And you can't predict that chaotic system. So I like that about that sequence. What I didn't like about that sequence, and maybe I just have to watch it again, is I didn't feel like the rules about Dorothy were clearly enough established so I could understand like what was the problem most of the time. Like for like half the time they just like couldn't get it off the truck for some reason.
Right.
But if like your plan involves having to rapidly get it off a truck because it can't be on the truck to release the things, I don't know. There was a lot of, the movie was asking me to go along with struggles for which I had no context. Like, why are they struggling now? Why is this super important? Why is it going wrong? I really don't have the rules to understand.
Why does the manner in which they get sucked up into the tornado matter so critically?
Right,
Like, is the tornado just going to pick them up no matter what?
It's like it's picking up every other object. It's picking up power poles.
Right.
So, yeah.
I agree with you, Alex. I think that's a valid critique. And also, it does seem odd to me because Dorothy as a device, as a plot device, is perfectly constructed because it ensures that they have to race directly towards the tornado, get as close to it as they possibly can. So it's like we have to go to the danger, get as close to the danger as we possibly can, and then we have to somehow get to safety. But the mechanics of like that, the task, like in the moment, are not ever clearly set up. And so I do agree with you that there's like, you created the perfect plot device in this Dorothy thing. And then it's odd that like I never have a clear image of like how it's supposed to go.
Right. Like what does
it's
success
kind of
look
that
like?
Heist thing. Yeah. It's kind of that heist thing. Like tell me how it's supposed to go. And then I'll know how exactly it's all going wrong. Or what the problem is when like a problem arises.
Yeah.
We need that like 90s 3D pre-visualization of like, you know, here's where it needs to be put on the street so that the computer goes right over it. And if it doesn't go right over it, it's not going to work. And we just never quite got that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I want to talk about lessons we're going to take away from Twister. But first I want to talk about Twisters and what our predictions are, what our feelings are, concerns, excitements, etc. And one of the reasons I was excited to revisit Twister was to kind of catalog all the things that it does well that make it work. And I feel like we've talked about a lot of these things, like, you know, really caring about the characters and putting, you know, effort into, you know, maybe non-standard, non-generic ways of rendering them on screen. The containment, tight 24 hours, clear specific goals, just a couple like vans. I feel like there's all these things that are really help create the world of this movie. And I feel like they are all really 90s things, like things you kind of had to do more in the 90s because of budget, visual effects, limitations, etc. And so one of my concerns is that some of these things will fall by the wayside, particularly the containment aspect that we were talking about of just like a really tight, pressure-filled time period with a specific goal. Like you were saying, Trisha, brings us as close to the danger as possible, and then we got to get out. Like, I understand what that is. They can't just do that again, right? They can't just be releasing more balls into a tornado, presumably.
I mean, in the trailer, a thing opens and balls fly out.
So maybe. But anyway, this is every time we kind of go back to the 90s, one of the things that I'm nostalgic about in these movies is that containment aspect, that simplicity, and that like, we're going to draw a little ring around, and this is the world that we're living in. And I think movies nowadays can try to do way more than they need to. And that's one of my concerns. What about you guys? What are you thinking here?
Yeah, that's all interesting. And I personally don't care. I'm just like, I hope if the worst case is I have like a fun time in a theater and never think about it again, I'm okay with that. The worst case, maybe I am furious that the movie is terrible. I don't know, but I'm just hoping, like, the trailer just has like a really fun energy to it that I'm like, you know what, I'm down to go on this ride. And then if I'm pleasantly surprised because the movie actually becomes like a somewhat moving character piece and does all the, like is actually like a really smart movie, great. Like that's going to be awesome to talk about. But what I will say is something I hadn't considered is in our sequel summer series of movies, some of these movies are a second movie. So Inside Out 2 and Twisters. And some of them, like Quiet Place Day One, is the first. What does this franchise look like outside of the main family? And we talked about Avatar 2, which we already talked about, but that's going to be one of our From the Vault episodes. So that's the second, what is an Avatar movie? Deadpool 3. So it's like these franchises that are sort of early in their franchisedom, and it is a sort of opportunity to say what is a X movie. Right. And not just like, let's do the first thing again, or let's do something totally different. But then it's, what if there are 5 of these movies someday? What are we going to be going? You got to kind of have that element and that element and that element. But then if you do this, it's going to feel too much like that one. We talked about this in the Bourne podcast and the bonds of just like those things that make it feel like that's part of that franchise. But what does that mean when the franchise is very, very young, even though obviously this is a 30-year-old movie, but this is the second Twister movie that's coming up. So I will be interested to see what things they choose from the first movie to sort of declare this is what a Twister franchise movie is, versus we slapped the title onto another movie and just made a goofy movie out of it, and I'm sure it'll be a little bit of both. So looking forward to seeing which it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
2 things are giving me some hope. One is that it's an interesting director attached, who did a quiet movie about an immigrant family in the Midwest, as his previous picture. So that's interesting. I also do think that if they are smart, they will follow the mold of Top Gun Maverick, which I think that movie is bigger and better in many ways because of just visual effects and just IMAX cameras. But the real power of that movie was just great character stakes and a really well put together final sequence that kept you guessing on the edge of your seat for every moment of it. So you don't have to go big. You don't have to go much out of this containment vibe to deliver real thrills if we care as much as we did during Top Gun Maverick. So I think the best case scenario for this movie would be it doesn't aim to have, now there's 20 tornadoes all at once. There's a fire tornado, I guess, going through like a gas plant. But essentially we're going for setting up stakes and characters so that when they're in peril, especially in the final act, we really, really care. We really, really worry. And so we're actually on the edge of our seats and not just kind of in that glazed over, waiting for the movie to be over mode. And that's the worst feeling, is just like, yeah, okay, right. Big tornado, the thing, everybody's gonna be fine. It's over now, the end. And Top Gun Maverick was so special and so exciting because I really didn't know what was going to happen in that finale.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to echo that because the characters were the first thing that came to my mind. Like, I just want to care about them. I want them to be interesting, relatable, sympathetic characters with like true arcs. Like, give me a character who has like a ghost and then a facade and then like goes through the journey of change. Like, I want that from a movie. It seems like, according to the trailers, there's going to be a romance, which is fine. That's part of Twister. Like, I like that. But it needs to be about something. Like, again, these things that hope for from character work. I couldn't agree more, Alex. But what you said too about them being in real peril, I would like to see some visual effects that are done practically, that are done in camera. I would like to see the actors interacting with real objects and
animatronic
on location
twisters
somewhere. Like I want them I want them to actually be standing in a cornfield. I want them to be in a real cornfield somewhere, with some similar thing that happened to Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton in this movie. Like I want them to be hit with dirt and wind and hail, like
hopefully a little safer than the first movie.
A little safer, yeah. Like, listen. The Twister set was notoriously troubled and unsafe, in fact. And the fact that there were not serious injuries is like maybe slightly a miracle. But there were some minor injuries and there were some less than ideal working conditions.
Didn't they temporarily blind Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton?
Yeah,
from, like, shining too much light in their eyes.
Just like one time. Anyway, I'm not saying I want that, but
a little bit of that. Yeah.
Just a tiny bit of blinding.
They're getting paid a lot. Yeah,
yeah, they are. No, but
risk your lives for us, please.
Listen, I was reading this interview with Helen Hunt, and for all that she went through, and admittedly, it's been quite a while now, so perhaps some of the experience of actually being on set every day has softened in her memory. But what she said in the interview was that, you have to sell it to the actor first, basically. And she was saying that nowadays you go act, you're looking at a green screen, you're looking at like a little point or a dot somewhere, and you're being told that a really emotional thing is going to be there, and you have to just look at it and interact with it. And she was saying that on set, the experience of being there with everyone else, that was like all the other storm chasers and the other actors and crew, they were out in Oklahoma and Iowa, and the weather was incredibly unpredictable. There weren't real twisters that like struck the movie set or anything, but there were like rainstorms and wind and a lot of that stuff that was also, most of that was manufactured for the movie, but there was a very like down to earth experience of being there. And when they're being like blasted with wind in a cornfield and their hair is flying around their face and they're looking up at a thing and they're being pelted with whatever, all of that is real, and the performances are not having to like do any extra work to sell it to the audience because they are already being sold it themselves. And I want a little bit of that. Like I want everyone to be safe. I'm not saying the good old days were that great. But there is something that gets lost if the actors aren't buying it. And we talked about this in the Jurassic Park episode. It's like, if you want to like enhance the puppet that you used, fine, but maybe use the puppet to get the performance, right? To like give the actors something on the day to truly look at that might make them marvel, that might make them terrified. I just think there is some magic there. And I kind of am hoping for a little bit of magic from Twisters.
That'd be nice. I think about Lord of the Rings as well, compared to The Hobbit. Just all those actors actually being out in the wilderness in New Zealand for how many months, that just affects you physically in your performance, as opposed to only green screen, blue screen all the time, every day. Mm-hmm. And there's an ineffable thing that comes from just being out in the place.
Yeah.
I've been having an amorphous thought recently that I have not been able to crystallize, but this is kind of getting at it, which is like, what is the role of imagination when watching a movie? And I feel like in some ways that's kind of a weird question, because it's like, well, it's a movie. You're watching something on the screen and you're just seeing what it is. But there is a certain amount of filling in and activation of the imagination that's happening in the audience. And I have a sort of, again, amorphous theory that like the way we're being asked to use our imaginations has changed as filmmaking has changed. And I'm listening to this and wondering if part of what activates our imagination isn't like spectacle of, crazy thing, pixels on the screen, but like the people's reacting to it. That like, we've talked about like that helps sell it, but maybe part of that selling is the activating of the imagination and seeing somebody else really going through a thing makes you empathize with that and activate your kind of experience with it. And so anyway, I'm going to report back as I continue to work on this theory, but I that is resonating with me as well, of like, maybe it's more important to really believe someone is afraid and not even see what they're afraid of than it is to see the spectacle of it. Like maybe the literal image isn't the moving thing. It's the person reacting in a realistic way to it.
And every poster and still shot you see of this movie is just Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton looking up at something, and it's just the looks on their faces. That's the movie.
Yeah. All right. Well, Twisters next week. Why don't we go around and say what lessons we're going to take from Twister? Brian, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Hot take, characters are important.
Oh.
And a thing I talked about, maybe we talked about this when we talked about like Sixth Sense or something, which is I've often said, does your movie work without the twist, right? So it's like, and that doesn't mean does it all, like can you just take out that moment of the movie and it all makes sense? Of course, it doesn't mean that. It means, is the rest of your movie interesting and compelling, such that if someone watches it a second time, they're still watching an interesting, compelling movie, not a movie that feels like, oh, the only reason I liked it the first time was because I got excited at the end when this like ooh gotcha thing happened, right? And I think the same goes for high concept movies. If it's a disaster movie or a superhero movie or a horror movie, it's like, I think it's a really good experiment to summarize your story, whether just write it down or tell someone about it without mentioning the big disaster thing or super power or the bus that can't slow down or the ship that can't stay up. And just like, what is the actual character story you're telling? The sort of what you call like the internal plot, the themes that you're exploring, all of that kind of stuff. And it's like, if what you're left with isn't very strong, then maybe you need to do some more character work. And obviously I know it's impossible to be like, summarize the plot of Twister without mentioning Twister. It's like, okay, that doesn't make sense, but you can talk about the character, like the love triangle and all this kind of stuff. And to me, we were talking about some of the Dorothy stuff. I didn't always follow why this thing had to happen right now or exactly what was going on, but I just cared so much about the character story that I didn't even need that other stuff to be super clear or compelling to me, because I was so focused on this character story at the heart of the movie. Probably not when I was 14 and saw this for the first time, but also I like that it works both ways, and that's how movies should work. And then of course, as we've talked about, I also love that those high concept things, they are forcing the character stuff, right? So we talk about Jurassic Park. It's like, what is Alan Grant's character arc? What is John Hammond's character arc? How is the story world forcing them to be faced with the truth of what they believe and the truth of what they should believe? And I feel like this movie is doing that too. It's the yes, here's the character story and it's all compelling, but also the Twister part of it is now forcing all of those things together. And that's good screenwriting and stuff we talk about all the time. But I feel like it's especially a good experiment with, if you're writing a drama, you're already writing a drama. But if you're writing this kind of movie, you should also be writing a drama, at the heart of beneath all of the outside of the suck zone.
I don't know why that also triggered one of the cheesy moments that took me out of it is like when they're all at Aunt Meg's house and they're talking about the scale of twisters and they're like F2, F3. Oh yeah, it's probably like a strong F4. And she's like, is there an F5? And everyone goes silent. And just like looks around like, I can't believe she said that. Like, yeah. Wow, the weight of this. We all know what F5 means. I didn't think anyone would think to say F5 because we just said F1, 2, 3, and 4. But now they said F5. And, oh man. Anyway, that was a funny moment.
I'll call it one more moment, which is, when I think about what feels different about this film compared to like a Jurassic Park, at the end of Jurassic Park, there's a very quiet, beautiful moment of Alan Grant with the two kids sleeping on his shoulders, and a knowing look from Ellie, and a look out the window at the pelicans, and it's very simple and human. End of this movie, they're like tied to like an outhouse or some kind of outdoor small structure, whipped around with like wind and mud and gross stuff. And then they start making out like teenagers, and then we like go to credits. It's just that to me sums up how this movie feels different to me than, the other movies of the 90s that are still my beloved classics. There's just a little bit of that. I don't know, like this doesn't quite feel right.
This
even
is
for
the
these
director of
characters.
Speed.
Right.
I just want to remind you. Yeah.
It's John. It's true. Yeah.
Jan de Bont.
Jan de Bont.
Alex, what's your lesson from you're taking away from Twister?
Well, I was watching some behind the scenes actually, and realizing how much work went into the sky in this movie, because like you were saying, I think Trisha, they both had really terrible weather they had to deal with on set, but also not terrible weather, which was a problem because there was supposed to be terrible weather in the scenes. And so I think it's just a lesson of, this is an example of a movie that both has the flashy visual effects, the actual tornadoes, the house rolling across the road, some really awesome. I mean, that one's still an awesome moment.
Yeah, it is.
Having to drive through a house that just flipped over onto the road.
We're going in.
Yeah. Like, it's really fun.
Ridiculous, but awesome.
Yeah, really fun, awesome stuff. But then the real painstaking work to have a consistent mood and just setting of like this one stormy day. So much of the visual effects work is just sky replacement and rotoscoping people in front of the sky in like every shot. And so, and I think I respect this movie for bothering to do that, for bothering to invest in the entirety of that world building and not just the key set piece moments, and having, even Christopher Nolan, like in Inception, it's just like, it's pouring rain, but it's sunny because it was sunny that day in Los Angeles. There was an effort to not ever break us out of the mood of that stormy tornado day. So yeah, good investment in the visual effects you don't notice, which are sometimes the most important.
So interesting to also think about this era of visual effects where every movie was like the first time they'd had to do a thing. And so you're just like watching the visual effects like world slowly build up their repertoire of things that they could do. And so like, how do you simulate a tornado? How do you do sky replacements? Like, those are things that are easy to do now, but like in the 90s, that was like for the first time we're having to do that with digital effects. And so it's just fun to like go and watch each of these markers push that whole medium forward. Trisha, what's your lesson?
My lesson is about Dorothy and the 4 Dorothys, which I think is really interesting. We've talked about the importance of, or just like the device of having a countdown in a movie, and how clean and efficient and smart it can be to use just like a finite number of things that you have to do before the end of the movie. There are 4 Dorothys in this movie, and I think they're really cleverly employed as a symbol and as like a representation in some ways of Joe and Bill's relationship, or like a way to check in sort of on Joe and Bill's relationship, because Dorothy as a project is something that was left undone or incomplete in their relationship. And so again, like when Bill is first being brought along for the ride, Dorothy is the device that gets him in there. This is something that was left incomplete that I like still believe in. The relationship is over there, but like this is something that I'm passionate about. I am going to like follow Dorothy until the end, basically. And so as a setup, it works really well. But then as we like basically fail with Dorothy's along the way, we are constantly forcing Bill and Joe to talk about their relationship because that's what Dorothy is. She is like their relationship. She is what has been left incomplete and undone and unsaid in this case. And so, yeah, the climactic midpoint argument happens because of Dorothy, right? Because Joe still believes, oh no, this is the twister. We can do it. Let's make this Dorothy thing happen. And the balls have spilled out all over the road. And she is, frantically trying to gather them up as the storm is going to come and kill them both. And it like again, it's doing all of this work and the specific way that basically Dorothy is, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Held back, or prevented from like doing what she's supposed to be doing, is continuing to motivate them in the reveals of the truth of their relationship and enforcing them to speak to each other plainly and about the things in their relationship that they don't want to confront. So just as like a symbol and also as a device that breaks down a facade, having Dorothy in this movie and then saving two of them for the final climax, right? Like I didn't really remember, but I was like, oh, we're going to lose all three Dorothys. And then the fourth Dorothy is going to be for the F5 tornado at the end. But it's actually, they lose two, right? There's like a misfire with that big tornado at the end. And then they have to try again, just kind of like raising the stakes. And like, as a screenwriter, I was like, well, rule of three is like, I think I would have made it just three then. But I don't know. I just really like everything that it's doing. I think it's just like so smartly used. I do have questions about the radios in their cars and what the range is on what you can pick up. Like, it's wild. Like, they're just out in the rainstorm tornado having an argument nowhere near the cab of the truck, as far as I can tell. And no one's depressing any kind of button or anything. And it's all coming really clearly to everybody else.
Right,
but beyond that, like, other than that, I think Dorothy is really smart.
Yeah.
When in that midpoint too, isn't the fact that she's gathering them up and she's trying to save it and he's kind of like, no, abandon it. I mean, it's a really nicely on the nose symbol in that moment.
Oh, yes, exactly.
And we have to shout out that it's called Dorothy, a very clear reference to Golden Girls.
Yeah, of course, yes.
Yep.
Well, and even the way they set it up, I think, when he's coming to get the divorce papers or whatever, and she's like, Dorothy, and he's like, she's here. Like, you don't know what it is, but it sort of are like, oh, do they have a child? Like, even if it's not
right?
literally representing a child, it is, like you're saying, a remnant of their relationship, like a child might be that's caught in this divorce. So,
well, I also noticed that moment as a character dimensionality moment thing, where it's like they are not clearly in love, they are not clearly at odds with each other, where they, it's the Die Hard moment of like, oh, John's coming to stay, we'll make the bed, or we'll make the guest bed, or whatever, where it's like, he can stay with us, but he's staying in a different room, right? It's that kind of thing. But then it's like that moment where it's, oh, we have this thing we're both excited about, we're both passionate about, so now we're going to go, like, it doesn't really matter whatever personal stuff we're dealing with, we have this one thing we want to focus on, and that's kind of what the entire movie is. But it's like that, what you're about to see for the entire movie in microcosm in that moment.
Yes. And we've mentioned this before, but people who are really good at their jobs and expertise is always really fun to watch. And so you get that sense, you get that kind of like bonus fun of watching them like succeed, right? And being good at their jobs. And that expertise element is there. The other thing that I just want to talk about if you're constructing love stories is that like shared work is intimacy. And that's kind of what this movie is, right? Like their community is the people who share their work, and there's a level of comfort and intimacy there. And I love the montage where everyone's working together to like put the like fan spinners on top of the balls to make them go up into the thing. But then also, like you're constructing a relationship and you have to make us believe it. Right? You have to make us believe there was a marriage here, and it has to be a marriage that we care about. But the marriage is already over by the time we are dropped into it. And so like doing that work, like just, I don't know, tapping into this psychological element of like people who work together share something powerful and profound. And I think that is also a really smart undercurrent of this movie.
So I was going to talk about just the containment aspect of it, because that really stood out to me this time, of just the time box 24-hour period, and how just I feel like how much that gets you in terms of constraints as a creator. Putting that on yourself, I think, is going to force you to do cool, efficient storytelling. But we talked about that a lot. So I just want to return to like the genre mixing that is happening here. And it's just really interesting to see it borrow from, like we said, the monster movie, horror elements, the romantic drama, as we've talked about. It feels like it's hitting on beats from all of these different genres all in one. And I feel like that's where a lot of other disaster movies can kind of feel hollow. It's just like, yeah, there's maybe like ostensibly The Rock has to get back to his daughter, I guess. I don't know. And like San Francisco's falling apart because of an earthquake. They like kind of like try to put in like other stuff, but like I feel like really paying attention to the narrative beats of these other stories and these other genres and mixing them together creates a unique mixture for, I think, particularly a disaster movie. Like, I think that's a fun thing to play around with. A Quiet Place, Day One, is kind of a disaster movie in some ways, and we sort of talked about how, it's the Quiet Place thing in some ways is to put interesting people into a disaster movie and see what that does to them. So being conscious and deliberate about what genres you're borrowing from, because this movie kind of ends up in a like man versus nature, man versus evil man versus heart. Like there's like all of it kind of happening at once. And I feel like that's what keeps it entertaining and dynamic in a premise that like otherwise could, exhaust itself, I think, pretty quickly. Again, something very curious to see with Twisters, what they do with that.
I so can't wait.
I'm excited. It's gonna be windy. Hopefully, it will blow us all away. What else have you guys been watching recently? Alex, what have you been watching recently?
I went and saw Maxine, which is the conclusion, I guess, of the X trilogy, which is the movies X, Pearl, and Maxine.
Yep.
Better to Ty West. And, like a lot of people I've heard online, saying it's kind of underwhelming in some ways, the third act especially. But I will say I do really like watching Mia Goth just be wacky and wild. And I do like seeing kind of a sleazy depiction of Hollywood in the 80s. So there's a lot of fun stuff in the movie. And also Elizabeth Debicki is in it. And she's great. She plays this kind of like intimidating, hard-ass female director who takes her under her wing. And so there's a lot of delight I had watching the movie, but overall kind of a letdown. But yeah, it was an interesting experience because I did enjoy X and Pearl as kind of these, what would you say? Almost like kind of a grindhouse vibe. These movies, and Mia Goth as the kind of center of them, producer of them. Just very interesting trilogy.
And Maxine has Kevin Bacon and Giancarlo Esposito, and like it's just like a Halsey,
Michelle
like a bunch
Monaghan.
of just a bunch of people just showed up to play and knew they were being in this like weird thing, and it's fun.
It's very fun.
Nice, cool. Brian, what have you been watching recently?
Well, as we head into Twisters territory, I will mention that I watched Glenn Powell in Hitman, which is
that was my what am I watching? Okay, go ahead. Fine, go ahead, Brian.
Which is him as a undercover agent who poses a hitman in order to catch people trying to secure his services. And then, if you've seen the trailer, he meets a potential client and falls in love with her, et cetera, et cetera. Sort of ends up becoming this like kind of rom-com, kind of dark comedy somewhere in the middle. And Trisha, I thought of you because it does the like very on the nose theme thing where it's like he is in class teaching his class about this philosophical thing, and then then that's also his life. But it does it in a really, I think, clever way that I really enjoyed. I will say, for as bad as I think the like streaming world has been for certain movies that could have done really well in the theaters and could have actually had a big audience, but then they just come out being this little PS on a Friday night. I do appreciate movies like this, that this movie goes to some weird places and it kind of makes me go, yeah, if you had to do something that would make its money back in a theater and kind of be four quadranty and stuff, you couldn't do what this movie does. And I really appreciate that they let them go for it. And it's written by Richard Linklater and Glenn Powell. who we happen to have on good authority as a fan of some of the things we do. So I like to think if he's writing, maybe he's taking some lessons.
You're
for
welcome, is what we're
his
saying.
screenplay.
Yeah. Oh, hi, Glenn.
We like to think you're listening, Glenn.
Yeah.
Yes,
He for sure is.
for sure. Big fans. Very excited to see you fight tornadoes.
Trisha, what have you been
Truly.
watching?
Yeah, Trisha, what have you been watching?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah, I was going to talk about Hitman, which I really enjoyed, for the record. And as you're pointing out, it's just like slow, kind of, or I don't know. It takes its time with its themes for essentially being in other ways kind of like a wacky crime caper, like romantic movie. Yeah, I don't know. It's a very interesting film, but I really liked it. But I have to circle back because 10 seconds after we ended our last podcast, which I had talked about sugar during for my what am I watching, our producer Vince was like, Trish, you haven't finished it yet, have you? And I was like, nope, no, I haven't. Why should I? And he was like, well, I will say he's not here right now this evening as we're recording this, and he can say the biggest "I told you so" of all time to me, because wow, I was not ready for the end of Sugar, everybody. There is a From Dusk Till Dawn level of twist in this TV series that is saved for like essentially the second to last episode, and oh boy, does it get weird. I was wrong. I was wrong.
I went to Wikipedia and I just like went to the episode descriptions and I went like towards the end and I just looked and I was like, oh, there it is. Yeah, okay.
There it is. Yep. Everybody. I strongly don't do what Brian did. If you really want to go on the ride, I think you should go on the ride.
Yes, I did not want to.
Don't go on the ride though. It's like, I don't know. I don't know how it happened. Like, it goes from a fairly like, it's everything I said it was. It's noir-y and vibey and like kind of corny in a way. If you're like a noir fan, it all feels like it's kind of on the nose and like sort of maybe just a remix of other things you've seen, but like Colin Farrell's selling it to you and like it's kind of working. Michael's looking it up right now. He's dying. He cannot wait.
Curious.
But then it goes so out of bounds. And it's not at all what you thought it was, everybody. So yeah, I take it back. And if you, I guess, are looking for a thought experiment on like how, I don't know how this got made, like what was the sell? I'm just so curious about the behind the scenes now. And, but yeah, if we ended up doing like a what are we watching on this, it would have been like the best gotcha of all time on all of us. But as it was a pretty good gotcha on me.
All right.
So anyway, sugar, everyone.
It's so interesting because in some ways I admire, I don't know what the twist is. It sounds like it's not satisfying in any, even in a like wacky way. But like, it's a cabin in the woods thing where there is a way to do this where you break out of the world we thought we were in that still feels coherent almost, of like upon retrospect, it's like, oh, the whole time, of course it was that. But it sounds like this one is not that. It's not that turn where it's like, that's insane. Never saw that coming. But now I can rewatch the whole show and I can like understand it through a whole new lens. That's when it works. It sounds like that's not what this was.
Not in my experience.
Interesting.
Okay. Sugar.
Michael.
So I've been watching the new season of House of the Dragon. It's back, season 2. I am enjoying it. It's still a really fun blend of like, the Crown level of, people in cool palaces saying politics with subtext and drama, but then you also get dragons fighting each other. And so it's like hitting a really nice like sweet spot for me. I think I'm not as enamored with it as season 1. I feel like season 1 was such a breath of fresh air from where Game of Thrones ended, but still in that same world that I was like wowed by it. And the wow has kind of gone away, but it's still just a really well executed, well thought through, well written, well performed show that I'm enjoying a lot. And if you're watching it and you're not watching the Alt-Shift-X explained videos that go along with it, you are doing yourself a disservice. Alt-Shift-X is a friend of our show, a friend of our channel, and they make amazing explained videos that sort of recap an episode, but also kind of fill in some details from the books that support what's going on. And so it's somehow he's managed to find this formula that like captures the fun of kind of like, oh, I'm kind of rewatching the episode, but I'm getting little bits and pieces that enrich my experience and make me enjoy the next one even more. So highly recommend House of the Dragon and Alt-Shift-X and his Explained series. He releases basically Sunday mornings. He'll release the explained video from the previous week. So you can watch that and then you're ready for that night's episode. And to quickly buttress this, because I feel like I've talked about House of the Dragon, I've been watching a lot of supercuts of 30 Rock on YouTube. And it has been amazing, just like comfort food. And just makes me miss that show and that kind of comedy that is just so densely clever and fun and like kind of silly, but super smart. And just there's just nothing like it. And it makes me miss 30 Rock. So probably gonna go on a big 30 Rock rewatch soon. I'm warning everybody. Anyway, so that's what I've been watching. All right. Well, this has been our episode on Twister. We did it. It's very exciting. I had a lot of fun. And Twisters, the sequel, we will be back with next week as a Patreon exclusive. We talked a little bit about what we're excited about, what reservations we have. I'm very curious to see. I honestly never thought they would make a sequel to Twister.
No.
And they did. And I'm just so eager to see what that is. So next week will be our episode on Twisters over on the Beyond the Screenplay Patreon. I want to say a big thank you, as always, to the patrons for supporting this show and making it possible. Thank you to our producer, Vince Major. Thank you to our editors, Jose Gomez and Vicky Lewis. I'm Michael Tucker. I've been joined today by Trisha Rand, Brian Bittner, and Alex Calleros. All of our Twitter handles are on the show notes. Send us a tweet to say hi. Tell us what you think about Twister. I really want to know what people who have never seen this movie before make of it. Because we didn't quite have that on this podcast, and I think I want to know. So let us know over on Twitter, and we will see you guys in the next episode for our discussion of Twisters.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
You don't face your fears. You ride them.